safe. It's my turn to read the next chapter of Danny the Champion of the World, and I'm reading chapter 10, The Great Shooting Party. As soon as the doctor had driven away from the filling station, I went into the office and I got out the sign that said "Sorry, closed." I hung it on one of the pumps and then headed straight for the caravan. I was too tired to undress. I didn't even take off my dirty old sneakers. I just flopped down on the bunk and went to sleep. The time was 8:05 in the morning. More than 10 hours later, at 6:30 in the evening, I was woken up by the ambulance men bringing my father back from the hospital. They carried him into the caravan and laid him in the lower bunk. "Hello, Dad," I said. "Hello, Danny. How are you feeling?" "Oh, a bit woozy," he said as he dozed off almost immediately. As the ambulance men drove away, Doc Spencer arrived and went into the caravan to look at the patient. "He'll sleep until tomorrow morning," he said, "and then he'll wake feeling fine." I followed the doctor out to his car. "I'm awfully glad he's home," I said. The doctor opened the car door, but he didn't get in. He looked at me very sternly and he said, "When did you last eat something, Danny?" "Something to eat? Suddenly I realised how long it had been. I hadn't eaten anything since I'd had supper with my father the night before. That was nearly 24 hours ago. Doc Spencer reached into the car and came out with something huge and round wrapped in greaseproof paper. "My wife said to give this to you. I think you'll like it. She's a terrific cook." He pushed the package towards me and then jumped into the car and drove quickly away. I stood there clasping the big round thing tightly in my hands. I watched the doctor's car as it went down the road and disappeared into the curve. And after it had gone, I just stood there, staring at the empty road. After a while, I turned and I walked back up the steps into the caravan with my precious parcel. I placed it in the centre of the table, but I didn't unwrap it. My father lay on the bunk in a deep sleep. He was wearing hospital pyjamas. They had brown and blue stripes, and I went over and gently pulled back the blanket to see what they'd done to him. Hard white plaster covered the lower part of his leg and the whole of his foot, except for his toes. There was a funny little iron thing sticking out below his foot, presumably for him to walk on. I covered him up again and then returned to the table. Very carefully, I now began to unwrap the greaseproof paper from around the doctor's present. And when I finished, I saw before me the most enormous and beautiful pie in the world. It was covered over the top, sides and bottom with a rich golden pastry. I took the knife from beside the sink and I cut open a wedge. I started to eat it with my fingers standing up. It was a cold meat pie. The meat was pink and tender with no fat or gristle on it, and there were hard-boiled eggs buried like treasures in several different places. The taste was absolutely fabulous. When I had finished the first slice, I cut another and ate that too. God bless Dr. Spencer, I thought, and God bless Mrs. Spencer as well. The next morning, on Monday, my father was up at 6 o'clock. "I feel great," he said, and he started hobbling around the caravan to test his leg. "It hardly hurts at all. I can walk you to school." "No," I said, "no." "I've never missed one yet, Danny. It's 2 miles each way. Don't do it, Dad. Please don't do it." So that day, I went to school alone. But he insisted on coming with me the next day, and I couldn't stop him. He had put a woolen sock over his plaster foot to keep his toes warm, and there was a big hole in the underneath of the sock so that the metal thing could poke through. He walked a bit stiff-legged, but he moved as fast as ever, and the metal thing went clink on the road each time he put it down. And so life at the filling station returned to normal, or nearly normal. I say nearly normal because things were definitely not quite the same as they had been before. The difference lay in my father. A change had come over him, and he was a big change, but it was enough to make me certain that something was quite worrying him. He would brood a good deal, and then there would be silences between us, especially at supper time. Now and again I would see him standing alone, with very still in front of the filling station, gazing up at the road in the direction of Hazel's Wood. Many times I wanted to ask him what the trouble was and had done something. I'm sure he would have told me at once. In any event, I knew that sooner or later I would hear all about it. I hadn't long to wait. About 10 days after his return from hospital, the two of us were sitting on the platform at the caravan watching the sun go down behind the big trees on the top. We had our supper, but it wasn't my bedtime yet. The September evening was warm and beautiful and very still. You know what makes me so hopping mad? He said all of a sudden. I get up in the mornings feeling pretty good. And then about 9 o'clock every single day of the week, that huge silver Rolls Royce comes swooshing past the filling station and I see the great big bloated face of Mr. Victor Hazel behind the wheel. I always see it. I can't help it. And as he passes by, he always turns his head in my direction and looks at me. But it's the way he looks at me. As if it's just so infuriating. There's a sneer under his nose and a smug little smirk around his mouth. And although I see him for 3 seconds, it makes me madder than a mackerel. What's more, I stay mad for the rest of the day. I don't blame you, I said. A silence falls between us and I waited to see what was coming next. I'll tell you something interesting, he said at last. The shooting season for pheasants starts on Saturday. Did you know that? No, Dad, I didn't. It always starts on the 1st of October, he said. And every year Mr. Hazel celebrates the occasion by giving a grand opening day shooting party. I wondered what this had to do with my father being madder than a mackerel, but I knew for certain here would be the connection somewhere. It's a very famous event, Danny, but the shooting party of Mr. Hazel's. Do lots of people come, Dad? I asked. Hundreds. They come from miles around, dukes and lords and barons and baronets, wealthy businessmen and all the fancy folk from the county. They come with their guns and their dogs and their wives, and all day long the noise of shooting rolls across the valley. But they don't come because they like Mr. Hazel. Secretly, they all despise him. I think he'll be a nasty piece of work. Then why do they come then, Dad? Because it's the best pheasant shooting in the south of England. That's why they come. But to Mr. Hazel, it's the greatest day of the year, and he's willing to pay almost anything to make it a success. He spends a fortune on those pheasants. Each summer, he buys hundreds of young birds with the pheasant farm and puts them in the wood, where the keepers feed them and guard them and fatten them up ready for the great day to arrive. Do you know, Danny, the cost of rearing and keeping one single pheasant is up to the time when it's ready to be shot is equal to the price of one of those loaves of bread. It's not true. I swear it, my father said, but to Mr. Hazel it's worth every penny of it. And do you know why? It makes him feel important. For one day of the year he becomes the big cheese in a little world, and he even the Duke of so-and-so slaps him on the back and tries to remember his first name when he says goodbye. My father reached out a hand and he scratched the hard plaster just below his left knee. It itches, he says. It itches the skin under the plaster, so I scratch the plaster and I pretend I'm scratching my skin. Does it help? No, it doesn't. But listen, Danny. Yeah, Dad? I want to tell you something. He started scratching away at the plaster on his leg, and I waited for him to go on. I want to tell you what I would dearly love to do right now. Here it comes, I thought. Here comes everything, big and crazy. I could tell something big and crazy was coming simply from watching his face. It's a deadly secret, Danny. He paused and he looked carefully around him. And although there was probably not a living person within 2 miles of us at the moment, he now leaned close to me and lowered his voice to a soft whisper. I would like, he whispered, to find a way of poaching so many pheasants from Hazel's Wood that there wouldn't be any left for the big opening day. No one can shoot anything on October the 1st. Dad! I cried. No! Shh, he said. Listen, if only I could find a way of knocking off a couple of 100 birds all in one go, then Mr. Hazel's party would be the biggest washout in history. 200, I said. That's impossible. Just imagine, Danny. What a triumph, what a glorious victory it would be. With all the dukes, lords and famous men would arrive in their big cars, and Mr. Hazel would strut about like a peacock, welcoming them and saying things like, plenty of birds out there for this time of year, Lord Thistlethwaite, and, my dear Sir Godfrey, this is a great season for pheasants, and this very great season indeed. And then out they would all go, with their guns under their arms, and they would take up their positions surrounding the famous wood, and inside the wood a whole army of hired beaters would start shouting and yelling and bashing away the undergrowth to dive the pheasants out of the woods, and waiting guns. And lo and behold, there wouldn't be a single pheasant to be found anywhere. And if Mr. Victor Hazel's face would be redder than a boiled beetroot. Now wouldn't that be the most fantastic, marvellous thing we could pull off, Danny? My father had got himself so worked up that he rose to his feet and he hobbled down the caravan steps and started pacing back and forth in front of me. Oh, wouldn't it though? He shouted. Wouldn't it be terrific? Yeah, I said. But how? How could it be done? There's no way, Dad. It's hard enough just getting 2 birds up in those woods, let alone 200. Oh, I know that, my father said. It's just the keepers that make it different. Well, how many keepers are there? I asked. Keepers? 3, and they're always around. Do they stay right through the night, Dad? No, not right through the night. They go off up to home as soon as all the pheasants are safely in the trees roosting. But nobody's ever discovered a way of poaching a roosting pheasant. Not even my own dad. And he was the greatest expert in the world. It's about your bedtime, he added. Off you go and come in and I'll tell you a story. I hope you all enjoyed that chapter, boys and girls, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Bye.